And hello, how's everybody? Hope you're all doing well. Stay healthy, and do stay sheltered. Okay, I mean isolated. Don't get close to people. People are bad. People are sick. People are germy. So be paranoid until we know more about this thing and see how it's going. Okay, so a few words about Willmoore Kendall. Um, I think that I'd like to raise a couple of questions for you. I'll post something more in a couple of days about Diamond, but I wanted to say something about Kendall now and get you started thinking about it for the forum. So post to the forum and keep doing that. Keep sort of articulating. Keep engaged. Okay, stay engaged and stay in touch with me, please. Okay, so Kendall. Willmoore Kendall was a brilliant man by all accounts. He was a difficult man by any account. They said that at National Review he never got along with more than one person at a time, and that's probably true. He used to get drunk and call Jaffa in the middle of the night and talk for hours. So I mean, think about somebody who was like that, who was kind of cantankerous and difficult, but also brilliant. And everybody acknowledged that he was brilliant, even people who didn't like him, and most people didn't like him at some point. So graduated from University of Oklahoma at the age of 18. Went to Spain during the Spanish Civil War, became a Trotskyite, and went to Spain during the Spanish Civil War, and then ultimately decided that was not the right thing, and became a conservative. Went into the Office of Strategic Services in World War II, the precursor of the CIA, and then worked for the CIA for a couple of years. And then went to Yale in 1947. He had a PhD from the University of Illinois. Taught at Yale for about 15 years until they finally bought out his contract. I mean, this is how unpleasant he was, right? They paid him to give up tenure and go away at Yale. And he wound up at the University of Dallas, which, if you've ever been to the University of Dallas, it seems like Kendall's kind of place. Anyway, and where he died. He was born in 1908, died in 1967, 68, I don't know, something like that. So, and Kendall is conservative, right? So it's not accidental that the title of this essay is "In the Beginning," right? Because conservatives need a starting point, right? They need an origin, something that is that gives them a purpose, gives them a start, right? And this seemed to Kendall and to Eric Voegelin like something that might be worth doing, right? So because we need continuity. I mean, think back to Burke, right? Russell Kirk channeling Burke, to Richard Weaver, right? What are we descended from? What is it that we are dedicated to? And how can we make that advance in the proper way? So you look at his that first page 30. You look at his list of possible sources, right? Mayflower Compact, General Orders of Connecticut, Body of Liberties of Massachusetts Bay, and the Virginia Declaration of Rights. Now that's a really interesting list because there's a whole lot of stuff that it leaves out in there. We could probably talk about that sometime. Maybe you can talk about that in the forum. But you know, to find a document that makes clear what America's origins are, and more importantly for Kendall, makes clear how conservative America's origins are. So um, the problem is, of course, as you read through this, he doesn't make the Mayflower Compact seem all that conservative. It actually is a pretty conservative document, but Kendall, with his emphasis on deliberation and so forth, and sort of the open-endedness of what's good, makes it seem somewhat less conservative than you might expect. I should say a word or two about Eric Voegelin too. Eric Voegelin was kind of a legendary conservative. He's one of those people who came over to the United States during World War II. Was conservative, and was I'll just tell you the plain, unvarnished truth. I have never understood Eric Voegelin. Okay, he's kind of mystical and kind of, I don't know, it's weird. But Voegelin had great authority among conservatives, conservative intellectuals in universities and so forth, because he emphasized this question of origins, right? Where do we come from? How do we make sure that the places that we're coming from are, in fact, satisfying, right? Because ultimately for Kirk, ultimately for Richard Weaver, right? We have to rest in our principles. If the world doesn't allow us rest, then we have to find the principles that allow us to do that. Okay. So Voegelin is a critical factor there. So they begin. Well, where else would you begin? With God, right? I mean, that's how the Bible begins. That's arguably where we all began. But the importance of God, as Kendall stresses it, right? God is our witness. God is the one who is giving purpose to our polity, giving purpose to our polity, our community. And going against that, then, going against the community, going against the common enterprise, then, because God is their witness, becomes an offense against God. Interesting. But he goes on to say, right, it's a deliberative assembly, right? And this deliberative assembly has deliberated, has thought about it, and has chosen to exemplify their act, has chosen, I should retape this, but I'm not going to, has chosen to explain their act, that's better, as something that's being witnessed by God, a choice that's being endorsed and witnessed by God. So, sorry, I went to find the list. Oh, there it is. Okay, on 32, right, he's got this list of the parts of the document. They identify themselves, they state the purposes, they have the oath and an addendum to the oath, in which they tell us, he says, what kind of thing the new body politic is to be, and indicating to us perhaps what they understand a good body politic to be. Okay, so from Kendall's point of view, from the very beginning, the American framers, American thinkers, are thinking about what is a good polity, and are making it a conscious choice, a conscious decision to explain what that is. Um, okay. Um, but of course, only one of these items on his list here has anything to do with issues of government, right? And that is the purposes for which they state the business in hand. Um, so why are they doing this? And what kind of thing this new body politic is to be? So um, this actually seems pretty unsatisfying as a founding document. And one of the things that you need to think about is whether you think Vogelin does a good job of identifying this as one of the founding principles or founding events of America, right? America socially as opposed to America politically. Think about Locke's two-part discussion of how polities come into being, right? There is society. Society, Locke says, never disappears. But there are polities, and polities are sometimes divided, maybe by overthrow, maybe by a deliberate choice of the people, maybe by revolution, right? There might be different reasons for why a polity might come apart and be reformulated. Okay, see, this is why I usually am asking for questions, because I have to think about this from time to time. I have to pause. Okay. Yeah, why do you think he makes the big deal out of the king as the defender of the faith? You know, that was the reason that the British king has that title is because of Henry VIII. Henry VIII, at the beginning of the Reformation, Henry VIII wrote a theological defense of the Pope, and the Pope was so impressed, he bestowed the title Defender of the Faith on Henry VIII. And when Henry left the Catholic Church, he took the title with him and kept it. So you can decide for yourself whether you really think he is a defender of the faith, or whether that's a big heresy that the British have perpetuated and put it on their coinage for the rest of time. Okay. So hang on just a sec. I'm going to pause. Sorry. So on 33, he comes to what I think is sort of the heart of the issue here. And that is that the inhabitants of Massachusetts or Massachusetts Bay are committing themselves to a sort of continuous deliberation about what good is. What is good order? And this is, he says that right in the middle of 33, right? So that the door is thrown wide open for continuous deliberation about what is good order, what is a good regime. So for Kendall, right, that deliberation, and he talks later about moderation, and moderation is I think connected with this in important ways. That kind of deliberation is critical to what he sees as the virtues of democracy. So unlike some others, right, Kendall is not, at least at this writing, Kendall is not committing himself to the idea that America is a Christian nation, that America is a pious nation, that America is dedicated to certain, property rights or gun rights or whatever, right? He's really emphasizing the open-endedness of this, and in some ways, that's quite a liberal idea. So this is interesting, and why Kendall becomes known as a conservative is an interesting question, I think. We don't actually know when this was written. As you see on the title page of this book, George W. Carey, who had been one of Kendall's students, George Carey finished the book for him. So we don't know at what point Kendall, I mean, maybe somebody does, but I don't. At what point Kendall started this book and allowed Carrie to finish it up for him. Hang on just one sec. Sorry. It's amazing how bored people get when they are socially isolating, and we have lots of cat stories. Okay, so deliberation, right? Democracy. So Kendall is really, of all of these conservative thinkers, Kendall is probably the one who is most centrally concerned with democracy and democratic deliberation. So I think it's worth kind of paying attention to. And when we talk about Jaffa, when we talk about Diamond, we'll talk a little bit about how that might, how those differences might have occurred. So on 34, then, they announce their purposes, right? We, the signers, the compact says, combine in a civil body politic, 1, dedicated to the glorification of God, 2, the advancement of the faith, 3, the honor of our kingdom, king and country, and finally, to good order. So that sets out 4 purposes. See my fingers? 4 purposes that the polity, the political entity is to achieve. That's a compact and really convenient kind of list of what they thought was important. But again, right, the question of what is good comes back. The laws are to address themselves to the general good of the colonies, and general good seems to figure here as a shorthand statement of the 4 purposes made. Just and equal laws, just laws that apply equally to all. And again, the door, he says, is thrown wide open to future deliberation on the question, what is just? So it seems to be committing Americans not to, not even to any of these 4 purposes, right? But to deliberating about how best to achieve the purposes that they've laid out for themselves, but also to asking the question, what is just? And this comes back on 35. He continues it on 35 because we see in the end that it's all pretty open-ended. What shape might these new decisions take? Right? There's no constraint. There's no limit on what they might be able to do. No ceiling. And he goes beyond that, right? Due obedience, right? Meekness and convenience. They are to obey the laws. Top of 35, right? It's not a matter of the laws being meet and convenient, but they're being thought meet, that is considered or deemed meet and convenient, which makes it a very complicated business, and he's right about that. Meetness and convenience for the general good is not treated as a settled matter, a call for continuous thought, and we may add for new decisions. So trying to think through exactly what Kendall is getting at here, I think takes a little bit of deliberation. And so I want to hear you talk about this in the forum, okay? Yeah. All right. Now, I want to skip to 38 because I don't want to make you watch this any longer than you have to. But 38, his third point, the signers say nothing unless by implication about their individual rights. Now, this changes our Lockean, this dissolves our Lockean framework about understanding the founding of America, or the founding of any polity for that matter. right? Um, because for Locke, a polity is about rights. That's where they start. That's the very foundation of anything, right? And Kendall says, hey, if this is our foundation, it doesn't say anything about that. We don't have to worry about that. It's not important, or it's important only as an act of subsequent deliberation, not primary, original, primeval deliberation. So, right, one might start out from the compact and arrive at some rights by some such logic as the following. This is what he goes on to say on 38, and you can read through that, right? How do we get rights? And only by further deliberation on the nature of the polity that we've constructed for ourselves. On 39, he brings in equality, right? Which again is a Lockean principle. Equality, that is equality in any meaning of the term that would be acceptable to the custodians of our official literature, right? This is, and you've seen conservatives are again and again talking about sort of the official keepers of the public faith, but also the official kind of guardians of what is authoritative and good, right? Sorry, that is equality in any meaning of the term that would be acceptable to the custodians of our official literature is wholly absent from the vocabulary of the authors of the compact. So this idea, and this is, by the way, this is exactly what sets Jaffa off eventually about Kendall, right? That the Declaration of Independence, that the declaration in the Declaration of the equality of human beings, Kendall says that's not part of our heritage. It's not part of our polity. So, and again, that's a challenge to the Lockean assumptions about it. Yeah, and then yeah. So I mean, look at what he says on 40, right? He goes on to kind of elaborate and make this nastier, right? The suspicion arises, indeed, he says, the suspicion arises, now is as good a time as any to get it into words, that those who tell us that freedom and equality, with freedom understood as a matter of individual rights, are the supreme symbols of the American political tradition, might well be talking through their heads, or really mean to say that somewhere along the line, somewhere after the compact and the Constitution, the tradition somehow turned itself upside down. And this is, we'll come to Jaffa soon, but this is exactly what Jaffa is concerned about. What Jaffa is accused of in elevating Lincoln, right? That Jaffa himself is engaged in turning the American political tradition upside down. And then finally, moderation. That's something that's really absent from a lot of other discussion about American politics. And I think it's interesting, and it is actually worth thinking about. Because in some ways you can read the Federalist Papers as being a plea for moderation, right? And a plea for moderation, I think in just quite the sense that Kendall is also calling for moderation here. That it's to be deliberative, it's to be thoughtful, it is to wrestle with this problem of what is the good, what is just, how do we enact the good and the just in our political community. And maybe, yeah, maybe I'll leave it at that. Oh, one last thing. Okay, so on 41, 42. The quote is from 42. The signers do not know it, but in the compact they have merely established a society, not a government, so that their symbols with the passing of time will have to be revised in order to provide for the relationship between society and government. In other words, this is step one of the process that Locke describes, right? So step one is you found a society. Step two is you found a constitution. And step two, you can repeat as often as you need to, as often as you want to, according to law. You'd have to think about whether Kendall thinks that too, and really devote some thought to it, and again talk about it in the forum. Okay, so that's probably enough. I'm sure you think it's enough, and I'm going to post this and welcome your thoughts and comments and prayers, of course. Bye.